Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The first time I saw it, I almost ran it over again. That's what I keep telling myself, that it was already dead when I found it. But deep down, somewhere in that part of your brain that remembers being prey, I know that's not true. Listen, before I tell you what happened on Highway 49 last Tuesday night, I need you to promise me something. Promise you'll check your rearview mirror tonight. Promise you'll look twice at anything lying still on the road. And promise you won't stop, no matter how much it looks like it needs help. Still here? Good. That means you're smarter than I was. See, I used to be the guy who'd break for a plastic bag if it looked vaguely animal-shaped. My ex, Sarah, used to joke that I'd probably get myself killed one day trying to save a already dead possum. Funny how some jokes stop being funny. Now the story begins. Tuesday started like any other day in Millbrook, Alabama. I was driving back from my sister's place in Montgomery, taking the back roads because I-65 was a parking lot thanks to some 18-wheeler jackknifing near exit 31. Highway 49 stretched out in front of me like a black ribbon. Nothing but pine trees and kudzu on either side. The radio kept cutting in and out, static eating through whatever country song was playing. I remember thinking I should have taken the truck in to get the antenna looked at. Funny what sticks with you. It was about 11:47 p.m. when my headlights caught it. This lump right there in the middle of my lane. My foot hit the brake before my brain even processed what I was seeing. The car lurched, tires squealing just a little, and I swerved into the oncoming lane to avoid it. As I passed, I caught a glimpse in the yellow wash of my headlights. Fur. Definitely fur. Maybe brown, maybe gray, hard to tell. But it was the size that made me slow down. This wasn't some squirrel or rabbit. This thing was big, like German Shepherd big. I pulled over about 50 feet past it, engine still running, in my rearview mirror. I could see it lying there, still as death. The road was empty in both directions. Just me and whatever that was. Damn it, I muttered, killing the engine. Look, I know what you're thinking. Why stop? Why not just keep driving? But here's the thing about small towns like Millbrook. We look out for each other. And that includes our animals. What if it was someone's dog? What if it was still alive? Suffering. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight and stepped out. The night air hit me like a wet blanket, thick with humidity and the smell of pine sap. Crickets were going crazy in the woods. But there was something else too, this weird, underlying quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. My footsteps on the asphalt seemed too loud as I walked back towards the shape. The flashlight beam bounced with each step, creating crazy shadows that made the trees look like they were moving, 20 feet away. I stopped. The beam illuminated matted fur. Yeah, definitely a dog. A big one. But something was off. The proportions seemed wrong somehow. The legs looked too long. Or maybe the body was too short. Hard to tell from this angle. "Hey, buddy," I called out softly. "You okay?" No response. Obviously, what was I expecting? I took another step closer, then another. 15 feet now. The smell hit me. Not the iron tang of blood or the sick sweetness of decay, but something else. Something like wet dog mixed with, I don't know, copper? Ozone? Like the air before a thunderstorm. 10 feet. I could see its side wasn't moving. No breathing. Poor thing. But then I noticed its position. It was lying on its side, legs stretched out, but its head was twisted at this weird angle, looking back toward its tail, and its eyes. The eyes were open, 5 feet now, close enough to see they weren't the glassy, unfocused eyes of something dead. They were watching me, tracking my movement. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The thing, because I couldn't think of it as a dog anymore, didn't move, just kept staring with those eyes that reflected my flashlight beam in a way that wasn't quite right. Not the green or yellow you'd expect, but this sick, pale silver. You're not dead," I whispered. That's when I saw its mouth. Just a slight movement. Lips pulling back to reveal teeth that were... God, they were so white, too white, like they'd never been used, never torn into meat or crunched on bones. Pristine. Perfect. Wrong. I took a step back. My heel caught on something. Probably just a crack in the asphalt, but it was enough to break whatever spell was keeping me frozen. I turned and ran, sprinted back to my car like my life depended on it. Behind me, I heard movement, not the scramble of paws on pavement, but something else, something that sounded almost like laughter. No, that's crazy. Dogs don't laugh. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't laughing. I yanked open my car door, jumped inside, and locked it. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by my taillights. The road was empty. The thing was gone. I drove home with my high beams on, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Nothing followed me. At least, nothing I could see. My house is this little 1-story ranch on the outskirts of town. Nothing special, but it's got a good fence and motion lights that I'd installed after some raccoons got into my garbage last year. That night, those lights were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I sat in my driveway for a full minute, engine running, watching those lights and trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress from work, maybe. Or maybe it really was just an injured dog and my imagination had run wild. The mind plays tricks in the dark, everyone knows that. Finally, I killed the engine and made a dash for the front door. Got inside. Locked it. Then immediately went around checking all the windows. Everything secure. Good. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. Okay, maybe 4. And tried to process what I'd seen. The image of those eyes wouldn't leave me alone. That silver shine, the way they'd tracked me like it was thinking, calculating. My phone buzzed, making me jump and spill bourbon on my shirt. It was a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. You stopped, good. I stared at the screen. Ice forming in my gut. Who could... Another text. Most people just drive by. But you cared enough to check. That's rare these days. Who is this? I typed back. Hands shaking. Someone who noticed. Someone who's been waiting for a person like you. I blocked the number, poured another drink. Tried to convince myself it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe someone saw me stop and thought it would be funny to mess with me. Small town, people talk, that's all. But then I remembered. The road had been empty. No cars in either direction. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in my living room with all the lights on. Bourbon bottle getting emptier. Jumping at every sound. Around 4 a.m., one of the motion lights clicked on. I scrambled to the window, heart hammering. Nothing there. Just the empty driveway and my car sitting where I'd left it. The light timed out after 30 seconds. Clicked off. Darkness again. 10 minutes later, it clicked on again. This time I was ready. Watching. Waiting. Still nothing. No raccoons, no cats, no wind to trigger the sensor. Just nothing. Click. Darkness. Click. Light, click. Darkness. This went on for an hour. The pattern was always the same. 10 minutes of darkness, 30 seconds of light, like something was testing the sensor, learning its rhythm. When the sun finally came up, I was exhausted but wired on adrenaline and coffee. I called in sick to work, first time in 2 years, and spent the day researching. What kind of animal plays dead? Possums, obviously. But this thing was way too big. Some snakes, certain birds, but nothing that looked like what I'd seen. I even drove back out to Highway 49 in broad daylight, parked right where I'd stopped the night before. There was nothing on the road. No blood, no fur, no evidence anything had been there at all. But on the shoulder, pressed into the soft dirt, I found tracks. They looked almost like dog prints, but wrong. The toes were too long, too spread out, and there were only 3. 3 toes and what might have been a thumb, if dogs had thumbs. The prints led from the road into the tree line and just stopped, like whatever made them had just vanished. That's when I noticed the smell again. That copper ozone scent. Stronger now. Strong enough to make my eyes water. I got back in my car and drove home, breaking the speed limit the whole way. The texts started again that afternoon. You came back, curious, that's good too. Did you see the tracks? I left them for you. You're different from the others. I didn't respond, just kept blocking numbers, but they kept coming from new ones, always short messages, always knowing things they shouldn't know. The motion lights are smart, but I'm patient. Your bourbon is almost empty. The Jim Beam, right? Sarah was wrong to leave. You're special. That last one made me call the police. Officer Reynolds came out, took my statement, looked at the texts with this expression that said he thought I was either drunk or crazy. "Look, Tyler," he said, using that tone cops use when they're trying to be patient. "We get reports of injured animals on the highways all the time. Coyotes, deer, sometimes even bears. They get clipped by cars and wander off. As for the texts, probably just kids with a police scanner. Heard the call and decided to have some fun. Kids who know what I drink, who know my ex-name." He shrugged. "Small town, buddy. Everyone knows everyone's business. Just change your number and try to get some sleep. You look like hell." I did change my number. Fat lot of good it did. The texts found me anyway. New number won't help. I need you to understand something. This isn't random. You were chosen. I stopped reading them after that. Just deleted them as they came in. Tried to pretend everything was normal. Went back to work. Smiled at customers. Acted like I wasn't jumping every time a dog barked or checking over my shoulder every few minutes. But normal was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Because things started happening. Little things at first. I'd come home to find my gate open. Just a crack. Nothing disturbed. Nothing missing. Just open. The motion lights stopped working altogether. I replaced the bulbs, checked the wiring. Nothing wrong with them. They just wouldn't turn on anymore. Then came the sounds at night. Scratching at the walls, soft at first, like a branch in the wind. But branches don't scratch in patterns. They don't tap out rhythms that almost sound like Morse code. They don't stop the instant you get up to investigate. I installed cameras. Those lasted exactly 1 night before the footage corrupted. All of it. Just static and that same copper ozone smell when I opened the camera housing. The memory cards were fused, melted into plastic lumps. I thought about leaving, packing up and starting over somewhere else. But where would I go? And what if it followed? What if it wasn't tied to this place but to me? The breaking point came Thursday night. 9 days after Highway 49. I was in bed, not sleeping. I hadn't really slept in days, when I heard my doorknob turn. Just a tiny sound, metal on metal, but in the silence of 3 a.m., it might as well have been a gunshot. I lay there, paralyzed, listening to the knob turn slowly. So slowly. Testing, the deadbolt held. Thank God. I'd started using it after the text began. The knob returned to its neutral position with a soft click. Then, knocking. Soft. Polite even. 3 gentle raps. Tyler. The voice was wrong. Like someone had learned to speak by reading about it rather than hearing it. All the right sounds in all the right places, but missing something fundamental. Tyler, I know you're awake. I didn't answer, couldn't. You were kind to me, on the road. No one's been kind in so long. The doorknob turned again, faster this time, aggressive. The deadbolt rattled but held. I want to return the favor, open the door, Tyler. Let me thank you properly. Go away. My voice came out as barely a whisper. I can't do that, we're connected now. You stopped, you looked, you cared. Do you know how rare that is? How long I've waited. The door shook in its frame. Not like someone kicking it. More like something was pressing against it, testing its strength. The wood creaked. I've been so patient, Tyler, so careful, following the rules, waiting for the right person. And then there you were, slowing down, stopping, coming back to check. Perfect. I'll call the police. That not quite right laughter again, closer to the door now, like the mouth making it was pressed right against the wood. They can't see me unless I want them to. Only you can see me, Tyler. Only you matter now. The pressure on the door increased. I heard wood splintering, the deadbolt straining. I rolled out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside it, for all the good it would do. I'm going to make you special too. Tyler, just like me. We'll wait on the roads together, find others who care, test them, judge them. Won't that be nice? The door exploded inward. Wooden fragments scattered across my bedroom floor. In the doorway stood nothing. Empty air, but the smell rolled in like fog, copper and ozone so thick I could taste it. Then the air shimmed, like heat distortion on hot asphalt, and I could see it. It still looked like a dog, sort of, if you didn't look too close, if you ignored how the legs bent in too many places, if you pretended the fur wasn't moving on its own, rippling like water. If you could somehow not see that its mouth opened sideways instead of up and down. Those silver eyes fixed on me. Too many of them now. Not just 2. They dotted its face like stars, all reflecting my terror back at me. There you are, it said without moving that sideways mouth, the voice coming from somewhere else, everywhere else. My good Samaritan. I swung the bat, it passed right through. Like hitting smoke, the thing tilted its head, or what I thought was its head, studying me. Not yet, you're not ready yet, still too solid, too real, but that's okay. I'm patient, I've been patient for so long. It moved into my room, not walking, just suddenly closer. The smell intensified, making my head spin, making the edges of my vision go dark. Sleep now, Tyler. Dream of empty roads and still shapes. Dream of kindness and its consequences. When you wake up, we'll begin your education. The last thing I remember is falling. The bat clattering across the floor. Those silver eyes multiplying, filling my vision like static on a broken TV. I woke up in my car, engine running, hands on the wheel, driving down Highway 49 at exactly 45 miles per hour. The clock read 11:43 p.m. 4 days had passed. 4 days I couldn't remember. My phone was buzzing with missed calls, texts from work, from my sister, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, couldn't take my hands off the wheel, couldn't press the brake, couldn't do anything but drive and watch. The headlights caught something up ahead, a shape in the road. Fur. Still. Silent. My foot moved to the brake without my permission. The car slowed, stopped, 50 feet away, just like before. But this time, I could see it clearly, see it for what it really was. It wasn't one thing, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, all pretending to be the same dead dog, all waiting, all watching with those silver eyes as cars approached. Some slowed, most didn't. The ones that stopped, God, the ones that stopped. I watched a pickup truck ease to a halt. An old man got out. Concerned, caring. He walked toward the shape, and it moved, so fast, faster than anything should move. Not attacking, no, embracing, wrapping around him like smoke. And when it pulled back, he was different, wrong. He got back in his truck and drove away. But I could see through the back window that his head was turning, scanning, hunting. My hands turned the wheel, pulled to the shoulder, parked. I tried to fight it, tried to keep driving, but my body wasn't mine anymore. Hadn't been since I woke up. I got out, walked to the trunk, popped it open. Inside was me, or something that looked like me, lying still, fur that wasn't fur. Eyes closed but breathing, waiting. Your turn. The voice came from my own mouth, but I wasn't speaking. Time to give back. Time to test kindness. Time to see who stops. I lifted the thing that looked like me, carried it to the road, placed it carefully in the lane, the perfect position, the perfect angle, visible but not too obvious. Pitiful, but not threatening. Then I got back in my car and drove exactly 100 feet down the road. Parked, turned off the engine, and waited. It didn't take long, maybe 20 minutes before headlights appeared in the distance. A sedan, slowing slightly as it approached. I held my breath, or whatever was controlling me held it. The car swerved around the shape and kept going. Good, safe, smart. But the next one stopped. A young woman, college age maybe. Alabama University sticker on her windshield. She pulled over, got out, already had her phone flashlight on. "Oh no," I heard her say, "poor thing." No, I tried to scream, tried to warn her, but my mouth wouldn't open, my body wouldn't move. I could only watch as she walked closer, closer. Saw her face change when she noticed the eyes were open. Saw her try to back away. Too late. The thing moved. Not like an animal, like an idea, like a thought made solid. It flowed up from the asphalt, wrapped around her, and for just a moment, I could see everything. The network, the web, hundreds of us all across the highways of Alabama, maybe thousands across the country, all waiting, all testing, all collecting the kind ones, the ones who cared enough to stop when it was done. She got back in her car, drove away, but I knew she'd be back tomorrow night, with her own shape, her own stretch of road, her own vigil. The thing that looked like me reformed on the asphalt, resumed its position, and we waited for the next one. I'm still waiting. I've been waiting for, I don't know how long now. Time moves differently when you're like this. Days, weeks, months blur together. An endless cycle of headlights and choices. Some stop, some don't. The ones who stop join us. The ones who don't. The ones who don't get to keep being human. But here's the thing, the reason I can tell you this story. Sometimes, like right now, it lets me surface, lets me be Tyler again for a few precious minutes. I think it's part of the test, part of the game. Let us remember what we were, what we lost, what we're helping others lose. Or maybe it just likes the irony. The boy who stopped to help, trapped forever, helping others into the same trap. I can feel it pulling me back under now. Feel my thoughts getting fuzzy, dissolving. In a few seconds, I'll be gone again, just another shape on the road, just another test of kindness. So please, please, next time you're driving late at night and you see something still on the highway, something that might need help, don't stop, don't even slow down, just keep driving. Because the thing about kindness is, sometimes it's exactly what the darkness is counting on. Sometimes the best thing you can do, the most human thing you can do, is look away. Sometimes not stopping is the only way to stay yourself. The eyes are opening now, silver and patient, always patient, waiting for the next good Samaritan, the next kind soul, the next, wait, do you hear that? That's a car coming. They're slowing down. They stopped. God help them, they stopped. I want to tell you what happens next. What I've learned in my time here. Because the thing is, it's not just about kindness. That's what I thought at first. What we all think. But there's more. So much more. The network isn't random. Nothing about this is random. Every stretch of road is chosen. Every one of us positioned precisely. We're covering interstates, highways, back roads, even some city streets. A web across America, maybe further. And we're all connected. When one of us catches someone, we all know. We all feel it. And here's what really keeps me up, or would, if I could sleep, the thing that took me. That's taking all of us. It's not the first. These roads, they're old. Older than the asphalt. Older than the settlements. And things have been waiting on them for a long, long time. I've seen others during my moments of clarity. Different shapes for different eras. Sometimes it's a broken wagon wheel on a frontier trail. Sometimes it's a crashed Model T on an early motor road. The shape changes. The hunt doesn't. But why? Why take the kind ones? Because kindness is how it spreads. See? Cruel people. Selfish people. They drive by. They're no use to it. But kind people, we stop. We care. We get close enough for it to touch us. And once it touches you, you're part of it forever. Another node in the network. Another trap for the compassionate. My sister called the police when I disappeared. I know because sometimes I can see through the thing that wears my shape. Can see the missing posters, the search parties, the news reports. Local man vanishes after leaving sister's home. They found my car abandoned on Highway 49. No signs of struggle, no explanation, just gone. They don't know I'm still here, still aware, still Tyler, just spread thin. Stretched across miles of asphalt and nightmare. The worst part, I can feel others like me. Hundreds of consciousness trapped in this network, all screaming silently, all trying to warn the next person who slows down. But we can't. We're passengers in our own existence, watching through silver eyes as more join us every night. There's a trucker named Big Jim who got caught in 1987, still out there. Still waiting by the highway near Tuscaloosa. There's a teenager named Monica from 2003. A nurse named Patricia from 2015. We're all here, all connected. All part of the same organism now. And it's growing. Every kind soul feeds it, makes it stronger, extends its reach. Soon there won't be a road in America you can drive without passing one of us. Without facing the test. But wait, there's something else. Something I've noticed. A pattern within the pattern. Not everyone who gets taken becomes a trap. Some disappear entirely, absorbed completely. And I think I know why. It's looking for someone specific. Has been looking for centuries. Maybe longer. Each of us is a net. Catching kind souls, testing them. Most become more nets, but occasionally, rarely, someone is exactly what it's looking for. When that happens, the whole network shudders, celebrates, and another piece of something larger clicks into place. What's it building? What's the end game? I don't know. But I can feel we're close, so close. Maybe just a few more special ones, and then something happens. Something changes. The roads themselves wake up maybe, or something sleeping beneath them does. There's an old man in the network, older than Big Jim, caught in 1952 on Route 66. Sometimes, when the connection is strongest, I can feel his memories. He wasn't the first in his family. His grandfather was taken too, on a Cherokee trail in the 1830s, and his grandfather's stories spoke of something similar happening to travelers even before that. It's always been here. Waiting, testing, building. The woman who stopped for me tonight, Sarah. Her name was Sarah. Just like my ex. Funny how patterns repeat. She's already changing. I can feel her joining the network, feel her consciousness spreading out, thinning. Soon, she'll be just another shape on another road, another test. But before she fades completely, she'll have a moment like this. A moment of clarity where she can speak, can warn, can add her voice to the chorus of those who stopped when they shouldn't have. That's what this is. You know, all of us. Talking at once through whatever channel we can find. YouTube, Reddit, late-night radio shows, wherever someone might listen. We're all trying to warn you, trying to save you from our fate. But here's the thing about warnings. They only work if people believe them. How many of you are thinking this is just a story, just creepypasta, fiction, entertainment? How many of you will forget this warning the next time you see something still on the road? The creature, the network. It counts on that skepticism. Counts on you dismissing this as fantasy. Because the most effective trap is the one that tells you exactly what it is. And you walk into it anyway. I can feel my time running out. The clarity fading. In a moment, I'll be back on Highway 49. Waiting. Watching. Part of me hopes no one stops tonight. Part of me, the part that's more it than me now, hopes someone does. Because we're so close to completing whatever this is. So close to the end of the pattern. And part of me wants to see what happens next, even if it means the end of everything human about the roads we travel. One last thing. If you're ever driving late at night and you see someone standing by the side of the road, not hitchhiking, just standing, watching, that's one of us. The ones who can still hold human shape for a while. We're watching for the shapes, monitoring our stretches, maintaining the network. If you see us, speed up, don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't stop to ask if we need help. Because we don't need help. We are the help. We're helping it find what it's looking for. And God forgive us. We can't stop. The sun's coming up now. That means the night shift is ending. The shapes go back to wherever they go during daylight. And we get to pretend to be human for a few hours. Walk among you. Maybe even serve you coffee or bag your groceries. Normal as can be. But when darkness falls, we'll be back, waiting by our assigned roads, watching for headlights, hoping you'll remember this story, hoping you'll keep driving, because every time someone stops, every time someone chooses kindness over caution, we get closer to the answer, and I don't think any of us are ready for what that answer might be. If this story kept you up tonight, good. That means you'll remember. You'll check your mirrors. You'll think twice, and maybe, just maybe, you'll keep driving when you should. Share this story, tell others. Because the more people who know, the fewer kind souls we lose to the dark. What did you see the last time you passed something still on the road? Are you sure it was really dead? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, kindness can be a curse. Story number 2. The storm passed, as storms do, leaving me alone with my new companions. They whispered to me sometimes, showing me visions of their realm, of the things that wait in lightning, of the hunger that never ends, but I hold them fast, as my grandmother did, as her grandmother did. Another link in an unbreaking chain. Mrs. Abernathy brings groceries now, leaves them on the porch. She knows what I've become, what I've chosen. The neighbors avoid the house, cross themselves when they drive by. They sense what lives here now. The first few weeks were the worst, learning to live with 3 alien consciousnesses sharing my body. They tested me constantly, showing me visions of what they could do if released. Cities drowning in shadow, entire populations consumed by their own fear, children vanishing into storms that never ended. This is what awaits, they whispered. If you falter, if you fail, if you die without passing the burden on. But they also showed me the past, the Chen women who came before, each one standing firm, each one holding the line. My grandmother rose, young and terrified but determined. Great-great-grandmother Mei Lin, accepting her fate with grim resolve, and others stretching back, an unbroken chain of sacrifice. I learned their names eventually. The storm feeders, though names isn't quite right, more like vibrations, frequencies of hunger given form. The first called itself the echo of ending lights, the second the hollow between heartbeats, the third simply the waiting maw. They're not cruel, not exactly. They simply are what they are. Hunters from a realm where existence itself is prey. In their dimension, they feed on dying realities, on the fear of universes facing heat death. Here, trapped in flesh, they must make do with smaller meals. The terror of individuals, the fear that storms naturally invoke. Through me, they feed. Little sips of fear from the world. A nightmare here, a moment of panic there. Never enough to harm, just enough to sustain. It's like being a cosmic coffee filter, straining their hunger through my humanity, diluting it to manageable doses. The physical changes started after the first month. My hair began turning white at the roots. Not gray. White, like snow, like ash, like the color of lightning frozen in time. My eyes developed a second ring of color, still brown on the outside, but inside, something that shifted between silver and shadow. I can't eat meat anymore. The taste of flesh, even cooked, even seasoned, reminds them too much of what they truly crave. I survive on vegetables, grains, things that never knew fear. Even then, every meal is a battle. They whisper how much better terror tastes. Sleep brings no rest. I dream their dreams, visit their realm, the space between seconds where they nest. It's, God, how do I even describe it? Imagine a place where geometry gives up, where time flows sideways, where the ruins of dead realities pile up like cosmic garbage, where things that should not be drift in the void between what was and what never should have been. In that place, storm feeders are small fish. There are things there that feed on entire dimensions, that treat universes like we treat apples. The storm feeders fled here not just to hunt, but to hide. Earth's storms are their sanctuary as much as their hunting ground. Tom Martinez came by last month, brought his priest. Father O'Brien took one look at me and started praying in Latin. I could feel my passengers recoil, not from holiness, but from recognition. The church knew about them, had always known. The old prayers weren't for protection from demons, but from things far older, far hungrier. How long? Father O'Brien asked after his prayers. How long have you been hosting them? 6 weeks, I managed. He nodded sadly. Your grandmother lasted 60 years. Your great-grandmother, 40. Each generation, the burden grows heavier. The hunger grows stronger. Why? I asked. Why is it getting worse? Because the barriers are weakening, he explained. Not just here, everywhere. The walls between worlds grow thin. More things are trying to break through, and the storm feeders, they're not the worst of what's out there. They're just the first. He left me with a vial of holy water. Not to fight them, he clarified, but for you, when the burden becomes too much, when you feel yourself fading. A reminder that you're still human, still yourself, still worthy of salvation. I keep it on my nightstand, next to a photo of my grandmother, a reminder, a promise, a threat. The storms come more frequently now. Climate change, the weather service says, but I know better. The barriers weakening, the hunting seasons extending. Last week, we had 3 storms in 5 days. Each one, my passengers grew stronger, more insistent, more hungry. I've started the ledger, like my ancestors before me, recording each storm, each feeding, each close call, because there have been close calls, moments when their hunger almost overwhelmed my control. During the second storm last week, a family broke down on the road near the house. 2 parents, 3 kids, sheltering in their minivan as the storm raged. The storm feeders went mad with desire. So much fear, so close, so easy. I nearly let them feed. The only thing that stopped me was seeing the youngest child, a girl, maybe 6, clutching a teddy bear, looking out the window at my house. And in her eyes, trust. She thought the house meant safety, thought help might come from within. I held them back, fought them with every ounce of will, until the family managed to restart their car and drive away. But it cost me. I aged 5 years that night. I could feel it, time itself being devoured from within. My mother finally visited last week. First time since I moved in. She took one look at me and burst into tears. I should have prepared you, she sobbed. Should have told you the truth, but I hoped, if you never knew, maybe it would skip you. Maybe the curse would die with Rose. It's not a curse, I found myself saying. And I meant it. It's a duty, a necessary evil. Someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. She stayed for 3 days, teaching me what she knew, what her mother had taught her before she fled. Techniques for maintaining control, meditations to preserve the self, recipes for teas that dull their whispers, small magics to extend my life, or at least make what remains bearable. The average guardian lasts 20 years, she told me on her last day. Your grandmother was exceptional, but each generation, the burden grows. You might have 10, maybe 15 if you're strong. And then you pass it on to your daughter, your niece, your cousin. The blood always tells, the blood always calls. I don't have any children, I reminded her. She looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and certainty. You will. The bloodline ensures its continuation. One way or another, the Chen women always have daughters, always have heirs. The storm feeders make sure of it. After she left, I found myself staring at the shattered remains of the 3 candles, still lying where they'd fallen. I'd been afraid to move them, afraid to disturb whatever residual power remained. But now I gathered the pieces, carefully, reverently. In the basement, I found the molds, ancient things made of stone and symbols, along with detailed instructions in Mei Lin's careful hand. How to make new candles, how to prepare for the next guardian, how to ensure the chain remains unbroken. Because that's the truth I'm only beginning to understand. I'm not the ending of this story. I'm just another chapter. Another guardian in an endless line, holding the darkness at bay until my strength fails. Until the next Chen woman takes my place. The wax is special, mixed with blood and salt and things I don't want to name. The wicks are braided from hair, guardian hair, a physical link between past and future. The process takes 3 days, must be done during the new moon when the barriers are strongest. I've made my first set, 3 white candles, perfect, pristine, patient. They sit on the mantelpiece now, waiting for the day when I'll need to pass them on, to trap my passengers for the next poor soul who inherits this burden. Some nights, when the storms are far away and my passengers grow restless, I practice the transfer ritual, memorizing every word, every gesture, every symbol, because when my time comes, and it will come, I need to be ready. The chain must not break, the hunger must not spread. And sometimes, on very dark nights, when the storms are far away and my guests grow restless, I catch myself wondering, what happens when I die? Who will take this burden? Who will become the next cage? My cousin Emily has a daughter, just turned 18. She has the Chen eyes, the Chen stubborn streak, the Chen sensitivity to storms. She doesn't know what awaits her, what birthright runs in her blood, what inheritance she cannot escape. I've started leaving letters, just in case, hidden in books, tucked behind pictures, breadcrumbs for the next in line, clues for some poor soul who'll one day inherit this house, these memories, these monsters. Because the storm feeders are patient. They've waited centuries. They can wait a little longer. But storms are coming. They always do. And when lightning splits the sky, when thunder shakes the earth, when candles light themselves in the darkness, someone has to hold the line. Someone has to pay the price. Last week I felt it. The first stirring, deep in my belly, a flutter, a possibility, a certainty. The bloodline ensuring its continuation. Just as Mom warned. Just as the curse demands. I'm pregnant. I don't know how. I've been alone since the binding. Haven't left the house except for groceries. But the storm feeders whisper the truth. This child isn't entirely human. It's part of the bargain, part of the price. Part guardian, part prison, part something else entirely. She'll be born during a storm. They've shown me that much. Born with the hunger already in her blood. Born knowing what she is, what she'll become, what she must do. And I'll raise her as best I can, teach her to be strong, to be ready, to be willing. Because one day, maybe sooner than either of us would like, she'll stand where I stand, host what I host, hold what I hold. The Chen line continues. The prison transfers, the hunger waits. So tell me, when you're lying in bed tonight, and you hear thunder in the distance, when your candles flicker without a breeze, when shadows move in ways shadows shouldn't move, will you think of this story? Will you wonder if it's just fiction? Or will some part of you, the ancient part that remembers when we huddled around fires for protection, know that it's true? Because here's the thing about hereditary curses, about family obligations, about birthrights written in blood and shadow. They don't care if you believe in them. They don't need your permission to be real. They just need the right bloodline, the right circumstances, the right storm. And if you ever inherit an old house with strange symbols on the mantelpiece and 3 white candles that seem too perfect, too pristine, too patient, run, just run. Or better yet, check your family tree. Check it carefully. Because Chen isn't the only bloodline with guardians. We're not the only family holding back the dark. There are others scattered across the world, each with their own burdens, their own barriers, their own hungry passengers. The Kowalskis in Chicago with their midnight mirrors. The Yamazakis in Seattle with their rain drums. The Johansons in Minneapolis with their ice primers. The Delacroix in New Orleans with their hurricane bottles. All of us, standing watch, paying prices, holding lines. Because the storm feeders aren't unique, they're just one species of between thing. One type of reality parasite. And each requires its own prison, its own guardian, its own sacrifice. So maybe, just maybe, that inheritance you're avoiding, that family tradition you've been ignoring, that weird obligation your grandmother keeps mentioning. Maybe it's not just superstition. Maybe it's another link in another chain, another barrier between the darkness and the light. And maybe one day, you'll find yourself standing where I stand, hosting what you never wanted, holding what you can't release, becoming what you swore you'd never be. Because some gifts, some legacies, some birthrights, they're really curses wrapped in candlelight. And once they choose you, once the blood calls, there's no escape. Only acceptance, only sacrifice, only the endless hunger of things that should never have found their way into our world, but did and do and will, until the last storm ends, until the final barrier falls, until there's no one left to hold the line. Sweet dreams. If you made it this far, if this story kept you listening in the dark, then maybe you understand now. Some tales aren't meant to entertain. They're warnings, whispered from one generation to the next. And if you're lying there right now wondering if those sounds outside are just the wind, wondering why your nightlight seems dimmer than usual, wondering why you suddenly feel like you're being watched, then do me a favor, share this story. Let others know what waits in the storm, because the more who know, the more who watch, the stronger our defenses become. Knowledge is power, even knowledge of things that hunt in darkness. And leave a comment, tell me, have you ever seen something light on its own? Have you ever felt that bone-deep certainty that something was fundamentally wrong? Has your family ever had traditions that seemed excessive? Rituals that felt too important to be mere superstition? Because if you have, then you already know. The storm feeders are real, the guardians are real, the barriers are real, and they're weakening. Subscribe if you dare. Ring that bell if you're brave enough. Because I have more stories, more warnings, more truths dressed as fiction. Tales from other guardian families, other defensive lines, other prices paid in shadow and shame. The Kowalski mirror keeper who went mad, seeing too many reflections of things that shouldn't reflect. The Yamazaki drummer, whose rhythms started attracting instead of repelling. The Johansson ice keeper who froze solid during a summer storm. Each guardian has a story. Each story has a warning. Each warning might save your life, or doom it. Because sometimes knowledge is a curse itself. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. Sometimes it's better not to know what waits in the darkness, what watches from the storm, what hungers for more than flesh. But you've come this far. You've heard this much. You can't unhear, can't unknow, can't unsee what your mind's eye has already shown you. So, welcome to the brotherhood of the warned, the fellowship of the fearful, the congregation of those who know. The storms are coming, they always do. And now, you'll never watch them the same way again, because now you know, somewhere out there, in houses marked by symbols, guardians stand watch, hold the line, pay the price. For you, for all of us, for a world that doesn't even know it needs protecting. Until the last candle burns, until the final guardian falls, until the hungry darkness finally feeds. Sleep tight, if you can. The candles that light themselves during storms. The first time I saw them light on their own, I thought I was losing my mind. 3 candles sitting on my grandmother's dusty mantelpiece in rural Vermont, suddenly flickering to life the moment thunder cracked overhead. No matches, no lighter, no explanation. Just 3 pale flames dancing in perfect unison while rain hammered against the windows. If you've ever experienced something that defies every logical explanation, something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what happened to me last October. But I'm warning you now, some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some lights were never meant to guide us home. All right, the story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I never believed in the supernatural. Not until I inherited my grandmother's house in Brattleboro, Vermont. The lawyer called it a modest estate, but when I drove up that winding dirt road for the first time, seeing that weathered Victorian sitting alone on the hill, modest felt like an understatement, more like forgotten, or maybe purposely avoided. The house had been empty for 3 months since Grandma Rose passed. The neighbors, the few that existed out here, told me she'd become peculiar in her final years. Mrs. Henderson from down the road mentioned it while dropping off a casserole. Your grandmother, bless her heart, she kept to herself mostly, especially during storms. Always lit those candles of hers. Strange thing, really. I found them that first evening. 3 white pillar candles on the mantelpiece, covered in dust but otherwise pristine, no wax drips, no blackened wicks, like they'd never been used. Behind them, barely visible in the fading light, I noticed symbols carved into the wood. Circles within circles, triangles. Patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The house felt heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the air itself had weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making each breath just a little harder than it should be. I told myself it was just the mustiness, the closed-up feeling of a house left empty too long. But even after I opened every window, that heaviness remained. That first night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old wood made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers. And those candles, I swear, I could feel them watching me. Which sounds insane, I know. Candles don't watch. They're just wax and wick. But lying there in Grandma's old bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting. The next morning brought contractors, estimates, plans to modernize the place before selling. Tom Martinez, the local handyman everyone recommended, took one look at those candles and stopped mid-sentence. Those are, your grandmother never mentioned where she got these. They're just candles, I said, but even I heard the uncertainty in my voice. Tom reached toward them, then pulled his hand back like he'd touched something hot. Maybe leave 'em be for now. Some things in old houses, they're better left alone. 3 days later, the weather turned. Dark clouds rolled in from the west like a living wall. The Weather Channel called it an unusual October storm system. But standing at the kitchen window, watching those clouds devour the sky, unusual felt like an understatement. I'd been going through Grandma's belongings all morning. Old photographs where she looked increasingly tired with each passing year. Letters written in shaky handwriting. The burden grows heavier, one read. But I hold fast. I must hold fast. The basement had yielded more questions than answers. Boxes of melted candles. Hundreds of them. All white, all partially burned. And a leather-bound ledger with dates going back to 1897. Each entry the same format. Date, weather conditions. duration of storm, and always, always the words they held. I was sorting through a box of newspaper clippings when the first thunder rumbled. Deep and long, like the earth itself groaning. The lights flickered, once, twice. On the third flicker, they went out completely, and that's when it happened. Those 3 candles on the mantelpiece, they lit themselves. No spark, no gradual warming. 1 second darkness, the next 3 perfect flames, dancing in unison, casting shadows that seemed too long, too dark, too alive. I stood frozen in the doorway, rational mind screaming that this was impossible, that there had to be an explanation, maybe some kind of chemical reaction, atmospheric pressure, static electricity. But deep down, in that primal part of the brain that still remembers when darkness meant danger, I knew better. The flames didn't behave like normal fire. They moved together, swaying left, then right, like they were dancing to music only they could hear. And the shadows they cast. God, those shadows. They stretched across the walls in shapes that made no sense, reaching, grasping, searching. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the windows, spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing, like warnings. And beneath the howl of wind and rain, I heard something else. Scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from inside the walls. Then I heard it. Grandma's voice, clear as day, even though she'd been dead for 3 months. "Sarah, dear, come closer." Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get in my car and drive until Vermont was just a bad memory. But my feet moved forward anyway. 1 step, 2, drawn by something stronger than fear. "That's it, sweetheart, just like I taught you, remember?" But I didn't remember. I'd barely known my grandmother. Mom had made sure of that. Some bridges are better left burned, she'd always said. Now, standing in that candlelit room with shadows dancing on the walls, I was beginning to understand why. The storm intensified. Rain lashed against the windows like desperate fingers trying to get in. Thunder shook the house to its foundation. And those candles, they grew brighter with each crash, their flames reaching higher, hungrier. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned to see a framed photograph on the side table, one I hadn't noticed before. It showed a young woman who looked exactly like me, standing in this very room, in front of these very candles. The brass plate beneath read, Mei Lin Chen, 1897. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that in the photograph, Mei Lin's shadow had too many arms. The scratching in the walls grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with growing horror that it was coming from everywhere, surrounding me, like something trying to claw its way in or out. That's when I saw them. In the shadows between the flames, faces, dozens of them, pressing against some invisible barrier, mouths open in silent screams. And among them, one face I recognized. Grandma Rose. But not as I'd ever seen her. Younger, terrified, reaching out to me with desperate hands. But there were others too. Mei Lin, her face twisted in eternal anguish. A man in Victorian dress, eyes black as coal. A child who couldn't have been more than 12, all of them trapped, all of them screaming, all of them warning. The moment our eyes met, the candles flared so bright I had to shield my face. When I looked again, the flames had returned to normal. The shadows were just shadows, and I was alone in a dark house with 3 impossible candles. But not really alone. Never really alone. I could feel them now, pressing against reality like hands against glass. Waiting, watching, wanting. I stumbled backward, knocking over a small table. An old music box clattered to the floor and began playing. a tinny, discordant melody that seemed to make the shadows dance faster. The tune was familiar, hauntingly so, like something from a half-remembered nightmare. The storm raged on for 3 more hours. 3 hours of scratching walls, of moving shadows, of whispers in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. 3 hours of those candles burning impossibly bright, impossibly steady, impossibly cold. When dawn finally came, when the last rumble of thunder faded into the distance, the candles extinguished themselves. Just as suddenly as they'd lit, one moment burning, the next nothing but wisps of smoke that smelled like copper and regret, I found myself on the floor. No memory of falling. My hands were covered in scratches, like I'd been clawing at something, or something had been clawing at me, and on the walls, in the morning light, I could see them, thousands of tiny scratch marks, forming words, forming warnings, forming names. Sarah, 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 over and over, like a prayer or a summoning. I spent the rest of that morning huddled in the kitchen, as far from those candles as I could get. But even there I could feel them, pulling at something inside me, calling me back. And worse, I could feel something inside me starting to answer. The next morning, I didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces in the flames, heard that scratching in the walls, felt those invisible hands reaching for me through the shadows. My phone had 37 missed calls from my mother. I finally answered on the 38th. "Sarah, thank God. I've been having nightmares. You need to leave that house, today, now." "Mom, what do you know about the candles?" Silence, long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "She lit them, didn't she? The storm lit them." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh, baby, I tried so hard to keep you away. Mom, please, I need to understand. Understanding won't save you. Nothing will. Once they've marked you." She was crying now. "I lost my mother to those things, my grandmother. I won't lose you too," but she'd already hung up, and when I tried calling back, straight to voicemail, every time. So I did what any millennial would do. I Googled it. Candles that light themselves. Self-igniting candles Vermont. Cursed candles New England. Nothing. Well, nothing useful anyway. Just creepypasta stories and paranormal forums full of obvious fiction. But then I tried searching my grandmother's name along with candles, and that's when I found the newspaper clipping. Archived from the Brattleboro Reformer, dated October 15, 1978. Local woman claims candles saved her from house fire. The article was brief. Rose Chen credited 3 special candles with alerting her to an electrical fire that could have burned down her home. She claimed they lit themselves to wake her. The reporter clearly thought she was confused, maybe suffering from smoke inhalation, but I knew better now. There were other articles too. A missing person report from 1963. Margaret Chen, Rose's sister. Last seen during a severe thunderstorm. Never found. A death notice from 1941. Li Chen, Rose's mother. Died of exhaustion during what newspapers called the storm of the century. And going back, always during storms. Always women from the Chen family. Always mysterious circumstances. The library's local history section yielded more. Much more. References dating back to the 1800s. Always the same story. 3 white candles, symbols on the mantelpiece, storms. And always, always something about protection. About keeping something out, or in I Found a Journal from a Traveling Preacher, dated 1856. The Chen widow keeps unholy candles. They burn without being lit. She speaks to shadows. The townspeople fear her, but they fear the storms more. For when the storms come without her candles burning, people disappear. Another account from the town doctor in 1889. Called to examine young Mei Lin Chen. Girl claims to see passengers in the lightning. Says they speak to her. Promise her things. Mother keeps her locked in during storms. Those damned candles burning day and night. Mrs. Abernathy, the head librarian who'd known my grandmother for 60 years, found me surrounded by old journals and newspaper clippings. She took one look at what I was reading and sat down heavily beside me. "So you've seen them light," she said. Not a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Your grandmother tried to protect you, you know. Kept you away all these years. But blood calls to blood, especially in that house." She pulled out a worn leather journal. "This was your great-great-grandmother's, Mei Lin Chen. She brought those candles with her from China. Or rather, they followed her. She handled the journal like it might bite. Wrapped in what looked like silk, covered in symbols similar to those on my mantelpiece. Your grandmother left this with me, said to give it to you if you ever came back. Said you'd need to know the truth. Though God help me, I tried to convince her to burn it instead." The journal was written in a mixture of Chinese and English. Desperate entries about lights in the darkness, about things that whispered promises, about the price of protection. The first entry was dated 1897. They followed us across the ocean. Even here, in this new world, they find us during storms. Father thought we could escape. But some hungers transcend distance, transcend borders, transcend reality itself. I read for hours, each entry, more disturbing than the last. Mei Lin wrote of the storm feeders, beings that existed in the spaces between moments, in the pause between lightning and thunder. They fed on human fear, on the electricity of terror that storms produce naturally in primitive human brains. The candles keep them out, Mrs. Abernathy explained. The ones who wait in the space between lightning and thunder. The ones who feed on fear and flesh, but what? But every protection has a price, and sooner or later, someone has to pay it. She showed me newspaper clippings she'd been collecting. Disappearances during storms, always in a 50-mile radius of the Chen house, always during the biggest storms. Your grandmother held them back for 60 years, but the hunger, it builds. And when a guardian dies, they need to feed, I finished. The truth clicking into place like a key in a lock. The 3 months since she died. How many storms have there been? Mrs. Abernathy's face went pale. 7 storms, 14 people missing. The police think it's a serial killer. They're not entirely wrong. She left me with the journal and a warning. Next storm's coming Thursday. Weather says it'll be a big one. If you're smart, you'll be somewhere else when it hits. And if I run? She looked at me with Isha's eyes full of pity. Then more people disappear. Maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. The storm feeders aren't patient, they're hungry, and only a Chen woman can hold their leash. That night, I read every word of Mei Lin's journal, learned about the binding ritual, about the symbols that held them, about the price each guardian paid, not in death, but in life. Slowly consumed from the inside out, fed upon in tiny increments, until there was nothing left but duty and determination. The final entry was the worst. I feel them inside me now. 3 shadows where my soul used to be. They whisper constantly. Show me their realm, the twisted space between seconds where they nest, full of the half-devoured remnants of those who ran, those who refused the bargain. Better to be slowly consumed than to let them loose upon the world. Better to burn from within than to let others burn without. This is the Chen burden. This is the Chen curse. This is the Chen purpose. May God forgive us for what we've become. May God forgive us for what we must continue to be. But I wasn't smart. I was curious, and worse than curious, I was beginning to understand that I didn't have a choice. The scratches on my arms were spreading, forming patterns, forming words, forming bonds, and somewhere in the distance a thunder rumbled. Thursday was coming. And curiosity, as they say, killed the cat, though in my case, it did something much worse. Wednesday night, I couldn't leave the house. Trust me, I tried. Packed my car, got as far as the end of the driveway. But the moment I crossed the property line, pain shot through every nerve, like being electrocuted from the inside out. I made it maybe 10 feet before I had to turn back, gasping, crying, understanding. The marks on my arms had spread, covering my shoulders now. Intricate patterns that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. They pulsed with my heartbeat, glowed faintly in the dark. And they hurt. God, they hurt. Like something burrowing beneath my skin, making room, making itself at home. I called Tom Martinez, told him I needed help boarding up the windows before the storm. He took one look at me and backed away. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Your eyes. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were still brown, but behind the brown, something else moved. Something with too many teeth. You need to leave, he said, already backing toward his truck. Whatever's happening here, it ain't natural, ain't right. I can't leave, Tom. That's the problem. But he was already gone. Tires squealing. And I didn't blame him. I'd run too if I could. That night, I prepared. Salt circles that Maylin's journal recommended. Iron nails driven into the window frames. Mirrors facing outward. Not to keep them out, I understood now, but to keep them focused. To keep them contained when the transfer happened. Because that's what the journal made clear. The storm feeders couldn't be destroyed, couldn't be banished, could only be contained, passed from one guardian to the next like the world's worst inheritance. And the transfer, it only worked during storms. When the barriers between worlds grew thin, when lightning could carry more than just electricity. I found other things too, letters from previous guardians hidden throughout the house, warnings, advice, apologies. One from my great-aunt Margaret, dated the night she disappeared. They're so hungry. I've held them for 40 years, but I'm so tired, so empty. They've eaten everything inside me except the will to continue, but even that falters. If you're reading this, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but someone has to hold them. And we are what we are. Another from a cousin I'd never known existed. The dreams are the worst part. Seeing their realm, the twisted space where physics dies, where they nest in the corpses of dead realities. Feeding on the fear of things that should not exist but do, they show me what happens to worlds where no one holds them back, where no one makes the sacrifice. Those worlds don't die, they suffer forever. Thursday arrived with a sky the color of old bruises. I'd spent the night reading every word, learning the ritual, understanding the truth. The candles weren't prisons, they were conduits, channels through which the storm feeders could be drawn, into the only prison that could hold them, a living human soul. But not just any soul, it had to be Chen blood. Something in our lineage, some ancient marker, made us compatible, made us cages. The journal spoke of the first bargain. Made in China centuries ago, a village plagued by disappearances during storms, a wise woman who discovered what hunted them, and the deal she struck. Her family would be guardians, generational wardens. In exchange, the storm feeders would hunt only when the chain was broken, only when a guardian died without a successor. The clouds rolled in at 3 p.m., black as midnight. pregnant with unnatural lightning. The weather service was calling it a supercell, warning people to seek shelter. If only they knew what really rode those winds. I lit regular candles throughout the house, dozens of them, creating light, creating warmth, creating the illusion of safety. Then I sat before the 3 white candles on the mantelpiece, Mei Lin's journal open in my lap, the ritual words strange on my tongue. The first thunder crack shook the house so hard books fell from shelves. The windows rattled in their frames despite Tom's boards, and in that moment between flash and sound, I heard them, laughing, hungry, free. The 3 white candles erupted into flame, but this time I was ready. This time I understood. The flames weren't keeping them out. They were calling them home. The shadows came first, pouring through the walls like water through a broken dam. They had shapes that hurt to perceive, angles that shouldn't exist, movements that defied physics, and in the center of each shadow, teeth, so many teeth. Finally, one whispered, its voice the sound of rain on graves. The bloodline weakens, the prison fails, the feast begins. They circled me, testing, probing, looking for fear, for that delicious terror they craved. But I gave them something else, something they didn't expect. Understanding. I know what you are, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I know where you come from, the spaces between seconds, the pause between heartbeats, the darkness between stars. You're not evil, you're just hungry. They paused. These things that had existed since before time had meaning, confused by recognition, by acknowledgement. The bargain stands, I continued, reading from the journal. The Chen line offers sanctuary. In return for restraint, you feed slowly, we contain willingly, both sides survive. The old one is dead, another hissed. Her strength failed. The bargain breaks. We feed freely now. The old one is dead, I agreed, but the new one stands before you. The blood continues. The chain remains unbroken. I could feel them testing my resolve, pressing against my mind, looking for cracks, for weakness, and finding acceptance, because that was the secret Mei Lin had discovered. They couldn't possess someone through fear. Fear made you flee, made you fight, made you resist. But if you accepted them, invited them, became their willing host, then the binding held. You know not what you offer, the third one growled. We are hunger incarnate. We will devour you from within, slowly, terribly, until nothing remains but a hollow shell. I know exactly what I'm offering, I replied. And I did. The journal had been very clear. Every guardian withered. Every guardian faded. Every guardian died young and empty. But they held. They always held. Better a slow consumption than a fast slaughter. Better one life over decades than hundreds in a single night. The storm raged outside. Lightning struck the house directly. The walls shook, the candles flared, and one by one they entered. It's hard to describe the sensation, like swallowing winter, like breathing in shadows, like inviting the void to make itself at home in your bones. They slithered beneath my skin, settled into my blood, made nests in the spaces between my thoughts, and with them came the hunger. Oh God, the hunger. An endless, gnawing need for fear, for flesh, for the electric terror of living things. I understood now why grandmother had looked so tired, why all the photos showed Chen women aging decades and years. This hunger, it never stopped, never slept, never satisfied, but also understanding. They weren't evil, not exactly. They were simply other. Creatures from the spaces between, drawn to our world by our storms, our fears, our delicious mortality. In their realm, they fed on the death of realities. In ours, they could feast on something rarer. Living terror. The candles went dark, fell from my hands, shattered on the floor, their purpose finally complete. The prison transferred, the bargain renewed. I stood in my grandmother's house, no longer entirely myself, no longer entirely human, but something in between. A living barrier between two worlds. A guardian wearing human skin. The storm passed slowly. They always do when you're counting every second. Every lightning flash brought whispers from my new passengers, showing me glimpses of their realm. The twisted space between moments where broken realities went to die, where they fed on the fear of dying universes, where they waited for storms to thin the barriers enough to hunt. By dawn, I understood my role completely. Not just a prison, but a filter. They could feed through me, tiny sips of fear from the world, enough to sustain them, not enough to harm, like a cosmic parasite finding balance with its host. The sheriff came by that afternoon, Deputy Ramirez with him, looking for missing persons from the storm, 3 teenagers who'd been camping in the woods, an elderly couple whose car had gone off the road. Storm was bad, the sheriff said, but we've had worse. Strange thing is, no bodies, just empty vehicles, like they just vanished. I wanted to tell him, wanted to warn him, but the words died in my throat, literally. The storm feeders wouldn't let me speak of them directly. Part of the bargain, part of the price. I'll keep an eye out, I managed. Hope you find them. But we all knew the truth, even if we couldn't speak it. In a town like Brattleboro, people knew the stories, knew to stay inside during the worst storms, knew to avoid the old Chen place when the thunder rolled. They just didn't know why. Now I know. The storm passed, as storms do, leaving me alone with my new companions. They whispered to me sometimes, showing me visions of their realm, of the things that wait in lightning, of the hunger that never ends. But I hold them fast, as my grandmother did, as her grandmother did. Another link in an unbreaking chain. Sometimes, during storms, I feel them testing their bonds, pressing against the boundaries of my body, of my will. But I remember Grandma Rose's strength, May Lynn's sacrifice, and I hold. Mrs. Abernathy brings groceries now, leaves them on the porch. She knows what I've become, what I've chosen. The neighbors avoid the house, cross themselves when they drive by. They sense what lives here now. And sometimes, on very dark nights, when the storms are far away and my guests grow restless, I catch myself wondering, what happens when I die? Who will take this burden? Who will become the next cage? I've started leaving letters, just in case. Hidden in books, tucked behind pictures. Breadcrumbs for the next in line. Clues for some poor soul who will one day inherit this house. These memories, these monsters, because the storm feeders are patient. They've waited centuries. They can wait a little longer. But storms are coming. They always do. And when lightning splits the sky, when thunder shakes the earth, when candles light themselves in the darkness, someone has to hold the line. Someone has to pay the price. So tell me, when you're lying in bed tonight and you hear thunder in the distance, when your candles flicker without a breeze, when shadows move in ways shadows shouldn't move, will you think of this story? Will you wonder if it's just fiction? Or will some part of you, the ancient part that remembers when we huddled around fires for protection, know that it's true? And if you ever inherit an old house, with strange symbols on the mantelpiece, and 3 white candles that seem too perfect, too pristine, too patient. Run, just run. Because some gifts, some legacies, some birthrights, they're really curses wrapped in candlelight. And once they choose you, once the blood calls, there's no escape. Only acceptance, only sacrifice, only the endless hunger of things that should never have found their way into our world. Sweet dreams. If you made it this far, if this story kept you listening in the dark, then maybe you understand now. Some tales aren't meant to entertain. They're warnings, whispered from one generation to the next. And if you're lying there right now wondering if those sounds outside are just the wind, wondering why your nightlight seems dimmer than usual, then do me a favor, share this story. Let others know what waits in the storm, because the more who know, the more who watch. The stronger our defenses become. And leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever seen something light on its own? Have you ever felt that bone-deep certainty that something was fundamentally wrong? Because if you have, then you already know the storm feeders are real. They're waiting. And somewhere out there, 3 broken candles lie in pieces. Their purpose fulfilled. Their burden passed on. Until the next storm comes. Until the next guardian is chosen. Until the hunger finds a new host. Subscribe if you dare. Ring that bell if you're brave enough. Because I have more stories, more warnings, more truths dressed as fiction. And trust me, you'll want to know them all, before it's too late, before the storms find you, before you learn firsthand that some lights should never be allowed to go out. Story number 3. Listen, I need to tell you something. Something about dust. Not the regular kind that collects on your grandmother's china cabinet or under your bed. No, this is about the dust that appeared in my apartment 3 weeks ago. The dust that only settles in perfect circles. Before you click away, before you dismiss this as another creepy story meant to keep you up at night, I need you to check something. Right now, look at the corner of your room, the one you never really clean. Do you see it? That thin layer of dust? Is it circular? If it is, God help you. But wait, subscribe to this channel first. Hit that notification bell. You're going to need to know what happens next. Trust me on this one. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I live in a studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. 3rd floor of a converted Victorian on Southeast Hawthorne. The kind of place where the floorboards creak their own symphony at night, and the radiator coughs like an old man with pneumonia. I'd been living there for 2 years when it started. I chose that apartment for the same reason every 20-something in Portland does. It was cheap and had character. The listing said vintage charm, which is real estate speak for the pipes knock and the windows don't quite close. But it had this beautiful bay window that looked out onto a tree-lined street, and the morning light made everything look like an Instagram filter. I was sold. My first year there was perfectly normal. I worked my shifts at Powell's, came home to my 600 square feet of overpriced vintage charm, and lived my life. I had a routine. Coffee from Stumptown on Mondays, the cheaper place the rest of the week. Yoga videos in my living room because I couldn't afford a studio membership. Reading in the bay window on Sundays while the rain painted patterns on the glass. I even loved the quirks of the building. Mrs. Patterson in 3A who practiced violin at odd hours. The way the stairs creaked in a specific pattern. 3rd step, 7th step, 9th step. The smell of coffee that drifted up from 2A every morning at 6 sharp. It felt like home. Maybe that's why I didn't leave when I should have. When you're comfortable somewhere, you explain away the strange things. You rationalize. You doubt your own senses before you doubt your safe space. It was a Tuesday morning, October 15th. I remember because I'd just gotten my coffee from that little place on the corner. You know the type, where they spell your name wrong on purpose and charge $8 for a latte. The autumn sun was streaming through my single window, catching all the dust motes floating in the air like tiny dancers. That's when I saw it. There, on my hardwood floor, right next to my second-hand IKEA bookshelf, was a perfect circle of dust, about the size of a dinner plate. The edges were so precise it looked like someone had used a compass to draw it. I stood there for a full minute, coffee growing cold in my hand. My first thought was, who the hell breaks into someone's apartment just to arrange their dust? Portland's weird, but not that weird. I grabbed my vacuum, one of those cordless Dysons I'd splurged on during Prime Day, and sucked it up. The circle disappeared into the machine with a satisfying whoosh. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The next morning, there were 3 circles, same size, same perfect geometry, one where the first had been, and 2 more flanking it like eyes on an invisible face. My skin prickled. I lived alone. My windows were painted shut, a fire hazard my landlord kept promising to fix. The door had been locked all night. I'd checked, twice. I vacuumed again. This time, I watched the floor afterward, actually sat there cross-legged with my coffee, staring at the empty hardwood like it might reveal its secrets. Nothing happened, just me, feeling increasingly ridiculous as the morning wore on. But that night, I heard it, a soft sound, like sand sliding against glass, or, no, like someone drawing in the dust with their finger. Slow, deliberate. I lay in bed, every muscle tense, listening to that whisper-soft noise coming from somewhere in my apartment. I should have gotten up, should have turned on the light and confronted whatever was making that sound, but I didn't. I pulled my covers up to my chin like a child and waited for morning. When sunlight finally crept through my window, there were 7 circles, a perfect honeycomb pattern spreading across my floor. Before the circles consumed my life, I need you to understand something about patterns. We see them everywhere. In the spiral of a seashell, the branches of trees, the way crowds move through Pike Place Market on Saturdays. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to make sense of chaos. But what happens when the pattern finds you? I became obsessed with documenting everything. I bought a journal from Powell's, employee discount, thank God, and started keeping detailed notes. Time of appearance, exact measurements, temperature changes. I even bought a cheap electromagnetic field detector from Amazon, the kind ghost hunters use on those terrible reality shows. The readings were wrong. Inside each circle, the EMF spiked to levels that shouldn't exist in a residential building. Outside the circles, normal. The boundary between normal and abnormal was razor sharp, as precise as the dust formations themselves. I started sleeping less, eating less. My supervisor at work, Janet, pulled me aside after I'd mis-shelved an entire cart of books in the wrong section. "Sarah, honey, you look like hell. Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell someone who might actually believe me. But how do you explain that your apartment is manifesting geometric dust patterns that defy physics? How do you say that without sounding completely insane? "Just haven't been sleeping well," I said. "Old building, you know, noisy." She gave me that look, the one that says she doesn't believe you but won't push. "Take care of yourself, okay? And maybe try some melatonin. If only it were that simple." I called my best friend Marcus. He worked at Nike headquarters and approached everything like a problem to debug. "Mice," he said immediately when I explained. "Or maybe settling foundation. Old buildings do weird things. Mice that arrange dust in perfect geometric patterns. Okay, so maybe you have OCD mice. Very Portland." But he came over that evening anyway, bringing his girlfriend Jenna and a 6-pack of that local IPA everyone pretends to like. While we waited for them, I'd done something strange. I'd measured every single circle, written down the dimensions in a notebook I'd bought years ago but never used. Each circle was exactly 11.7 inches in diameter. Exactly. Not 11.6, not 11.8. When I showed Marcus the measurements, his face went pale. That's... He started, then stopped, pulled out his phone calculator. That's a very specific number. In sacred geometry, it's... Don't, Jenna interrupted. Don't go down that rabbit hole. There's a logical explanation. But she was already pulling up her own phone, and I could see her typing 11.7 inches circle significance into Google. We sat on my thrift store couch, and I showed them photos I'd taken on my phone. The circles were so uniform they looked photoshopped. This is genuinely weird, Jenna admitted, tucking a strand of her purple-dyed hair behind her ear. She taught high school physics and didn't believe in anything she couldn't measure. The precision is unsettling. Marcus was already on his laptop, Googling combinations of dust, circles, and paranormal. His face grew increasingly frustrated. Nothing, not even on Reddit, and Reddit has theories about everything. That's when we heard it. The sliding sound. All three of us froze, beer bottles halfway to our lips. It was coming from the kitchen. We found 12 new circles on the linoleum, smaller than the ones in the living room, arranged in a spiral pattern that seemed to pulse when you looked at it too long. Okay, Marcus said, his voice an octave higher than usual. That just happened while we were sitting right there. Jenna knelt down, pulling out her phone's flashlight. Look at this, she whispered. The dust, it's not from your apartment. She was right. My apartment had the usual city dust, gray, gritty, full of tiny fibers and dead skin cells. This dust was different. Finer, almost crystalline. It caught the light like ground glass. We should go, Marcus said suddenly. All of us. Sarah, pack a bag. You can crash at our place. But I couldn't. You know how it is when something impossible happens in your own space? You need to understand it, to solve it, to prove to yourself you're not losing your mind. They left reluctantly, making me promise to call if anything else happened. I locked the door behind them and stood in my apartment, surrounded by dust circles like crop circles in miniature. That night, I set up my laptop to record, pointed it at the biggest cluster of circles and let it run. I also did something else, something I'm not proud of. I sprinkled flour across my floor, thin layers between the dust circles. If something was walking in my apartment, I'd see footprints. I barely slept, jerking awake at every small sound, every shift of the old building. At one point, around 2 a.m, I could have sworn I heard humming. A low, tuneless sound that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. But when I sat up to listen, it stopped. In the morning, I had 37 circles. They covered most of my floor now, overlapping in places, creating patterns within patterns. My laptop had captured 6 hours of footage. The flower was undisturbed. No footprints, not even the tiny tracks of mice or insects, but the flower inside each dust circle. It had turned gray, as if it had aged decades overnight. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat down to watch. For the first hour, nothing. Just my floor in night vision green. Then, at 2:47 a.m., it started. The dust didn't fall from above. It didn't blow in from the sides. It emerged. Rose up from the wood itself like the floor was exhaling. Particle by particle, the dust lifted and swirled, forming perfect circles with mathematical precision. No wind, no force I could see, just dust arranging itself with purpose. But that wasn't the worst part. At 3:33 a.m., something moved across the frame. Not walked, moved. A shadow that didn't match anything in my apartment. It had too many angles, hurt to look at directly, even on video. The laptop's image flickered and distorted whenever it passed. And in the distortion, I swear, I saw faces. I should have left then. Should have packed everything and moved back in with my parents in Beaverton. But I'd just signed a new lease. My job at the Powell's Books warehouse was finally paying enough to cover rent. And something else. Something I'm embarrassed to admit. I was fascinated. David Carpenter's notebook became my Bible. His observations were meticulous, scientific. He'd noticed things I'd missed. The circles appeared in multiples of prime numbers. First 1, then 3, then 7. The dust itself contained trace elements that didn't match anything in the building. Microscopic crystals that resembled no known mineral. But it was his final entries that made my blood run cold. October 28, 1971. The children see them now. The things in the corners. Tommy says they have too many angles. Rebecca won't sleep. She keeps drawing spirals. October 29th. Linda wants to leave, but I'm so close to understanding. The patterns. They're not random. They're instructions. Building instructions. But for what? October 30th, 3 o'clock a.m. I know what they're building. God help us, I know. The circles aren't the invasion, they're the blueprint. And we've been helping them by trying to understand. Every measurement, every observation. We're completing the equation. They needed conscious observers. They needed us to see the pattern to make it real. And now it's too late. The door is form. The entry cut off mid-word. I closed the notebook and looked around my apartment. The circles had spread to my bathroom, my closet, even inside my kitchen cabinets. Tiny ones, large ones, overlapping like Venn diagrams drawn by an insane mathematician. I started mapping them, taking measurements, looking for patterns. Then I stopped. David's words echoed in my mind. We're completing the equation. Was I doing exactly what the Carpenters had done? Following the same path to the same end? I needed more information. I spent the next 3 days in the Portland Library's historical archives, aided by my Powell's employee ID that got me into the special collections. What I found there changed everything. The building's history was darker than I'd imagined. Built in 1902 by Aldrich Blackwood, a wealthy spiritualist who'd made his fortune in timber. But Blackwood wasn't just interested in talking to the dead. His papers, donated to the Historical Society by distant relatives, revealed an obsession with dimensional architecture and the geometry of the between spaces. He'd designed the entire building as a kind of beacon. The angles of the walls, the placement of the windows, even the number of steps between floors. Everything was calculated to create what he called sympathy with the outer spheres. But it was a photocopied journal entry from 1908 that made me understand. The dwellers have shown me the truth. This reality is but one layer of an infinite stack, separated by membranes thinner than thought. In the spaces between, they wait, formless, timeless, seeking entrance to realms of matter and consequence. They cannot cross without invitation, without a door properly constructed. The dust is their medium, the circles their language. When enough conscious minds observe and map the pattern, the door stabilizes. The dwellers can finally take form. I have failed 3 times to complete the summoning. The servants flee. The tenants break their leases. But I will not give up. Room 3C is perfectly calibrated. Eventually, the right mind will come. Someone curious enough to see, intelligent enough to measure, and foolish enough to complete the work. I sat back in the library chair, my hands shaking. Blackwood had designed my apartment as a trap. A mathematical mousetrap for curious minds. That's when I met her. Dr. Elizabeth Ward, retired professor of theoretical physics from Reed College. She'd been sitting at the next table, and I'd noticed her glancing at my research materials. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Are you researching the Blackwood building?" I nodded. too surprised to lie. She leaned closer. I've been tracking incidents there for 30 years. You live in 3C, don't you? How did you? Because you have the look. Sleep-deprived, hyper-focused, covered in dust that won't quite wash off. She smiled sadly. My daughter lived there in 1987. She was a mathematics PhD student. The circles fascinated her. She sent me photos, measurements, theories. What happened to her? She realized what was happening in time. Broke her lease, dropped out of school, moved to Maine. She's a fisherman now. Won't go near anything involving advanced mathematics. Won't even balance her own checkbook. Dr. Ward pulled out a folder. But she left me her research. Would you like to see it? The folder contained photos, diagrams, and pages of calculations. But one sheet stood out. A map of Portland with red X marks scattered across it. Other buildings? I asked. Other doors. The Blackwood building isn't unique. There are 17 structures in Portland built on the same principles. Most have been demolished or renovated beyond recognition, but 7 remain active. And recently, she pulled out a newer map. The incidents have been increasing. All 7 buildings reporting dust circles, all in October. Why October? The veil is thinner. That's what the spiritualists believed anyway. But I think it's simpler than that. October in Portland, the rain starts, people spend more time indoors, more time to notice the circles, more time to study them, to complete the pattern. She slid a business card across the table. The same one Walter would give me later, I realized. Just a phone number. We call ourselves the Watchers. Former tenants, relatives of the disappeared, academics who've stumbled onto the truth. We try to warn people, to disrupt the patterns before they're complete. But we're so few, and the city is so large. Why don't you go public? Tell everyone? She laughed bitterly. We tried. In the 90s, we approached the city council, the newspapers, even that new internet thing. We were dismissed as cranks. Now we work quietly, one saved tenant at a time. I took the card. What should I do? Leave. Tonight. And never think about the circles again. The more you understand them, the more power you give them. Ignorance isn't just bliss. It's survival. Walter glanced around the empty lobby, then motioned me closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. Family in 3C. The Carpenters. Nice folks, 2 kids. They started finding circles, too. Dust circles. Complained to the landlord, but old Mr. Hayworth just thought they were crazy. He paused, his eyes going distant. I tried to help them. Gave them the same advice I'm about to give you. But David Carpenter was a skeptic, an engineer at Boeing. Thought there had to be a scientific explanation. What happened to them? David started measuring the circles, documenting them. Said he was going to publish a paper about spontaneous particle organization or some such nonsense. His wife Linda begged him to stop, to just leave, but he wouldn't listen. Said they couldn't afford to break the lease. Walter's hands trembled slightly. The night they disappeared, I heard it through my ceiling, a sound like reality tearing, like paper ripping, but deeper, wronger. Gone one morning, all of them. Door locked from the inside. No sign of struggle, just gone. He leaned back, studying my face. Left nothing but dust circles on the floor, hundreds of them, and in the center of the room, a larger circle, big enough for a family of 4 to stand in. I felt my knees go weak. They never found them. Police investigated for months, nothing. Like they just dissolved. He paused, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. This was David's. I kept it. Been waiting for someone else who could see them, someone who might understand. I took the notebook with shaking hands. The pages were filled with neat engineer's handwriting, measurements, theories, and toward the end, increasingly frantic notes about dimensional thin spots and geometric keys. "You should leave, girl, tonight. Don't pack, don't clean, just go." But I didn't. I went back upstairs and did more research. City records, old newspapers, missing person reports, the Carpenter family, David, Linda, 8-year-old Tommy, 6-year-old Rebecca. Vanished October 30th, 1971. Case never solved. I found other incidents too. 43. An elderly woman in 3C found dead, her body covered in circular dust patterns. 1987. A college student reported geometric dust phenomena before dropping out and leaving town. 2003. A couple complained about dust circles for 3 weeks before breaking their lease and fleeing. Always October. Always 3C. Always the circles. I called Marcus. "I need you to look something up for me. The building plans. The original ones from when this place was built." "Sarah, what are you... Please, just do it." 2 hours later, he called back. His voice was strange. Flat. "Sarah, your apartment. In the original plans from 1902, it wasn't an apartment." "What was it?" "A seance room. The Victorian who built this place was a spiritualist. The room was designed for communication with the beyond. It's built on specific geometric principles. Sacred geometry, they called it." My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Around me, the dust circles seemed to pulse with new meaning. "There's more," Marcus continued. "I found the spiritualist journal in the Historical Society archives. He wrote about opening doorways and the spaces between. Sarah, he was trying to contact something, and based on his final entries, I think he succeeded. That night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat in the center of my apartment, surrounded by circles like a child in a fairy ring. Waiting, watching. At 3:33 a.m., they came. The air grew thick, heavy, like breathing through wet cotton. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The dust circles began to glow with a faint, sickly light. Then the sliding sound started. But this time, I could see it happening. The dust rose from the circles, swirling upward in perfect spirals. Higher and higher, until it formed shapes in the air. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And in the center of it all, a door began to form. Not a real door, a gap, a wrongness in the air where reality grew thin. Through it, I could see God, I don't know how to describe it. A place that wasn't a place. Colors that don't have names. Distances that folded in on themselves. And things moving in that space, watching, waiting. The whispers started then, not in English, not in any language meant for human throats, but somehow I understood. They'd been trying to come through for over a century. The spiritualist had opened the way, but incompletely. They needed an anchor, a pattern, a map drawn in dust. Each person who'd lived in 3C had been a test. The Carpenters had fought. The elderly woman had died of fright. The others had fled. But I had mapped their circles, measured them, studied them. I had completed the pattern without realizing it. The door was opening wider. I could see shapes pressing against the thinning boundary. Too many limbs, too many eyes. Geometries that violated every law of physics Jenna had ever taught. That's when I remembered Walter's words. Don't clean. The vacuum. I'd been disrupting the pattern every morning, resetting their progress. If I hadn't cleaned. I lunged for the Dyson, still plugged into the wall, flicked it on and dove toward the nearest circle. The suction caught the glowing dust and the pattern wavered. The door flickered. The things on the other side screamed. A sound like grinding glass and static. They pushed harder against the barrier. And for one terrifying moment, something started to squeeze through. A limb, or what might have been a limb, made of angles and shadow. I vacuumed faster, running from circle to circle like a madwoman. The patterns collapsed one by one. The door shrinking, reality reasserting itself. The temperature rose. The whispers faded to angry hisses. With the last circle gone, the door snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. I stood there in my empty apartment, vacuum still running, gasping for air. The floor was clean, completely clean. No dust, no circles, no evidence of what had just happened except the frost on my windows and the smell of ozone in the air. I packed that night, threw everything I could fit into my Honda Civic, and drove to Marcus and Jenna's place. Stayed there for 3 days before finding a new apartment across town. Ground floor, built in 1995, no history, no seance rooms, no geometric mysteries. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. When I went back to 3C with Marcus to get the rest of my stuff, we found Walter in the lobby. He smiled when he saw me, relief clear on his weathered face. "Smart girl," he said. "You figured it out, the cleaning. That's the key. Keep disrupting the pattern, and they can't stabilize the door." "How do you know that?" I asked. His smile faltered. "How do you think I've lived here so long? Someone has to watch. Someone has to make sure the new tenants know to clean. The carpenters. I was out of town that week. Couldn't warn them in time. But why don't you just tell the landlord? Get the apartment sealed." Walter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think 3C is the only door. This whole city is built on old spiritualist sites, theosophist meeting houses, occult libraries. Portland's full of thin places. Someone has to watch them all." He handed me a business card. Plain white, just a phone number. "In case you see more circles," he said, "anywhere. We're always looking for people who can see them. People who understand." I took the card, drove away, tried to forget. But last night I found a circle. Just one. Perfect. Precise. In the corner of my new bedroom. It's been 3 weeks since I fled 3C. 3 weeks of normal sleep, normal dreams, normal dust that scatters randomly like dust should. I'd almost convinced myself it had all been stress-induced paranoia. Almost. The circle in my bedroom is smaller than the ones in the old apartment. Only about 6 inches across, but it has the same crystalline dust, the same mathematical precision. And when I knelt down to look closer, I found something that made my heart stop. In the center of the circle, barely visible, was a number. 1. I've been sitting here for hours. Walter's card in one hand, my vacuum in the other. I know I should clean it up. I know I should call the watchers. But there's something else. Something I haven't told you. Last week I got a package. No return address. Inside was David Carpenter's complete journal. Not just the notebook Walter had given me, but 3 more volumes. And a note. "Sarah, you were smart to run, smarter than I was. But they don't give up. They've been trying for over a century, and they're getting better at it. The circles will find you wherever you go. The only question is whether you'll be ready when they do." The later journals contain everything I learned about fighting them, about closing doors instead of opening them. Study them. Prepare. And whatever you do, don't let the pattern complete. DC. The thing is, I've read the journals. David Carpenter didn't disappear that night in 1971. He went through the door voluntarily, to close it from the other side. His family was never in danger. He sent them away days before, told them he'd died in an accident. He sacrificed everything to slam that door shut. But doors, even interdimensional ones, don't stay closed forever. The dust is so beautiful when it catches the light. Maybe I'll just leave it for one more day, just to see what happens. Or maybe I'll become a watcher too. Maybe that's what David meant. Maybe that's why the circle is numbered. It's not an invasion, it's a recruitment. The question is, which side is recruiting me? Listen. I need you to do something for me. Check your floors. Check your corners. Check the places you never clean. If you find circles, perfect circles, don't wait, don't study them. Don't try to understand. Just vacuum. And whatever you do, never let the pattern complete. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the detail I can't stop thinking about. In David's final journal, he wrote something that changes everything. The dwellers aren't invaders. They're refugees. Their dimension is collapsing, folding in on itself like origami in reverse. The circles aren't an attack. They're an SOS. Every pattern we disrupt condemns billions of formless beings to non-existence. But if we let them through, if we complete the pattern, our reality becomes theirs. We become formless. We become the refugees, seeking another world to colonize. There is no right choice. Only survival. So now I sit here staring at that single-numbered circle, paralyzed by impossible knowledge. Do I vacuum it up and condemn an entire species to extinction? Or do I let it grow, study it, maybe find a way for both our species to coexist? The number in the circle has changed. It now reads 2. Tomorrow it will be 3, then 7, then 11. Prime numbers, always prime numbers. Building to something. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because these things, they're not confined to Portland. They're not confined to old buildings. They're wherever dust can settle, wherever patterns can form. And once they find you, they never really stop trying. But maybe that's not the real horror. Maybe the real horror is that they're not the monsters in this story. Maybe we are. Sweet dreams. Tell me in the comments. Have you checked your corners yet? What did you find? And more importantly, what will you do about it? I'll be waiting for your answers. All 6,742 of them. P.S. If you see a circle numbered 3C, don't vacuum it. That one's mine. I've made my choice.